Hello, listeners. My name is Lowell, he, him, and welcome to our second episode of the Open Hearth podcast. I'm the community manager for Open Hearth, and you may have heard me host the Gauntlet podcast. This show follows that format. We've asked a couple of community members here to talk about a game that they played in the last few months, maybe with the community, maybe elsewhere online, or even face-to-face. So we have with us today Horst.
Hello, listeners.
And Will.
Hi, everyone. Everyone is on the Open Hearth. It's Will H and not the other Wills.
So we will go around in our first segment and have everyone tell us how their recent gaming has gone, what they've played or coming up, and then talk with us about a particular game. So, Horst, tell us what you've been playing.
I have been playing a lot lately. I have to say 23 was pretty poor, but 24 was already pretty good, and 25 is shaping up to be a great year. So I played Mythic Bastionland, a game that Dominic ran. It was pretty cool because we had the burrow creation as a shared experience, so everybody pitched in to create the burrow. Played another Chris McDowell game. It's a bit of a theme, which is Into the Odd. We played Iron Coral. Gabe ran that. It was pretty awesome. Gabe also ran a hex crawl called Wolves Upon the Coast. I think he mentioned that already on the Best of the Year podcast, so I don't have to add anything, except that the guy is an absolute hero. Shout out to Gabe. He ran the game for just one player, Michele. And then Puckett, who's another incredible community member, pinged me and said, dude, you have to play this. This is right up your alley. And I said, Puckett, you're right as always. And I signed up. And he ran it for 7 sessions, and it was amazing. Then Michele, the other guy from the hex crawl, ran Temple of the Bat Serpent, an OSR module with World of Dungeon, which was delightful. In the second session, the other 2 players bowed out, so it was just me and Michele. And Michele had learned it's totally okay to run for just one player. And he managed to drive me in a situation where I had no weapons anymore, nothing to do. I could either, die a glorious death or rip my eyes out and join the cult, which obviously I did.
As amazing. You do.
Delicious, you should. It was a 2-shot. Then I played Cluster. I think, Will, is it also on your list? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a game by LNR. It's a PBTA science fiction game. I think it's pretty clever that it kind of compresses the sector to, 5 or 6 planetary systems.
Yeah, like the number of players and then a couple of extra ones.
Oh, that's the rule. It creates like a pressure cooker situation where the players can't just jump onto their spaceship and just fly away from the problems. And I like that the cluster creation is done at the table with the players, and that the factions are really tied closely to the background story. It's similar to Uncharted Worlds, but I think better, a bit tighter. And then I played another playtest, Decay, by the amazing Paul R. And I have to say, Will H is also a co-author, I think.
Oh, yeah. I mean, generous, I think. It's just who else has read the Eclipse phase books, I think.
Right.
And so Decay is a gumshoe hack of Eclipse phase. There's actually on the Discord, there was a very sprawling discussion about gumshoe, and I found it really interesting that most community members said, I want to love gumshoe, but I don't. And I'm the opposite. I don't want to love it, but I do enjoy playing it. So why should I complain?
So which of those do you want to talk with us about today?
I completely forgot that I also started a campaign of Mythic Bastionland in November, and that is the game I would like to talk about. It was a play-by-post organization of a jousting tournament.
Played live, and then we moved to play-by-post.
In November, we started a live campaign of Mythic Bastionland. Mythic Bastionland is kind of a hex crawl with fairy tale vibes, where both elements are equally important, the hex crawling sandbox element and the dreamy atmosphere. And at the end of the last session, the players heard about a jousting tournament, and they decided to do that as the next thing they want to do. But December was difficult for me to commit to live sessions, so I suggested on a whim, more or less, why don't we do a play-by-post? And the player said, yeah, why not? I had the feeling that the players were a little bit reluctant. Will, what do you think?
No, I was 100% positive towards play by post. I think we were just in that trying to schedule a real one and it not working out, and then play by post. And I actually, I mean, we'll go on to talk about it, but I think it worked out really, really, really well.
That's why I want to talk about it.
Yeah.
A jousting tournament, the first thought I had is, yes, that is a great idea. It really is one of the tropes that fits the knightly theme. But then I thought, well, the mundane stuff, will it clash with the dreamy vibes we had already established in the first 3 sessions? So I really wanted it to blend and not to be in a jarring kind of juxtaposition. And so we set up a Discord server. I do know, I asked on the Discord, I asked Rich what other platforms are there. Discord, I think, is maybe the most popular. I don't know if it's the best. There are definitely dedicated platforms like Gamers Plane and Mythweavers. But I think because it was just an experiment, I think Discord worked really well. And also because we already had the live games, we had all the infrastructure, the character keeper and so forth already established. We don't need more infrastructure, if you will. We set up a couple of rules, I would say, like posting etiquette, posting frequency. I wanted the in-game channel. We had 3 channels: in-game channel, out of character, and dice roller. And I wanted the in-game channel to be as pure as possible. So no out of character questions, for example, something that would be completely normal in a live game. No mechanical bits. That was all done in the out of character channel. Or once or twice I put it behind like the spoiler block things. I don't know. It's just aesthetically pleasing to have the pure narration in the in-game channel. And I know that other people do it differently. There's a great blog post by Yochai Gal, the guy who wrote Kern. And he has a recent blog post about the question that you have to answer before you set up a play-by-post, like the rules, the frequency, how you separate in-game and out of character and so forth. Posting frequency, very important, very touchy subject, I would say, in the PvP scene. A lot of games peter out because people start to post less and less frequent. But I also didn't want it to be like a work or a chore. It was December, you have enough stress. Once a day, I think, is fair. I want it to be, you come home, somebody posted something, you post something, and it's something cozy that you come back to. We had one last rule, which was completely irrelevant at the end, which is if you're in a scene with several people, wait until everyone else chimes in before you post so that you don't make decisions for other players. But most scenes were either referee, player, or player versus player, so to speak. So why was it so great? Why did I pick it for my game of the month, so to speak? I think that the rhythm between the jousting and the interludes was really interesting. I think that having the time to think about the next scene is super important. When I run live games, I think my weak point is portraying NPCs in an interesting way, like tying the mechanics of combat into the narration. And in the play-by-post, it was spot on. And the reason is time. You have the time to consult your prep. I had minimal prep for the tournament, but I had a bit of prep about the realm, the different houses, the relationship between the holdings and so forth. There are amazing random tables in Mythic Bastionlands to portray like multifaceted NPCs. They all have goals and motivations why they want to achieve these goals. They have conflicts with other NPCs. So they have hobbies, which I like. And these NPCs, they kind of emerge from these random roles, and they are then interesting Like you have an idea about what the NPC could be, and then you roll something that completely surprises you, and that creates these complex, interesting characters. And you have the time to, interpret these results and then come up with the most interesting course of action. I like that. I like that the interludes in between the jousting rounds created a kind of context for the fight. It was not just two, knights riding towards each other, trying to knock each other from off the horse. Almost every fight had kind of a theme that was established by the PCs investigating the NPCs before the fight or meeting them after the fight.
I thought it was always so interesting how it's PvP at the end of the day, isn't it? The way that the tournament turned out was we drew against our fellow knights quite frequently, and the semi-final was a PvP between my character and was it Gabe's character or Michael's?
It was Michaelis. The
Yeah,
final was, yeah.
I admit that one downside to the Discord one was that I started to forget whose character was whose sometimes, But it was really, I mean, obviously we had a good group of players, like doing the PvP and that tension between all knights of the Brotherhood together entering the tournament. And then we had loads of like, whoever wins, brother, honor wins kind of like nightly moments. And that worked really well. And I think it helped like build up those NPC relationships as well. Because we were, PC, NPC, but it was all under that chivalric sort of, honor on the battlefield.
That also brings me to another aspect of time, which is PvP is often coined as an asynchronous way of playing, but I definitely wanted the PvP to be synchronous. I wanted it to be, step by step. You roll, we interpret the roll, we go to the next step, because PvP can be touchy, even if only glory is on the line. You don't want bad blood. And we had other moments where the game was played synchronously, or almost synchronously, when one player was investigating the castle and found a secret tunnel that was, you could see the dots when he was typing, when I was typing. That was really tense. Time is kind of the theme of the play by post. Another aspect of time that I really like is you don't have to block 3 or 4 hours on a given day to play the game. I have low-key GM anxiety, nothing terrible like anyone else, I would say. But it is stressful. And that PvP almost gave me energy instead of draining energy. And the other aspect, it's that you can dip in and out of the game world when you want to, kind of. If you play a live game, obviously after the live game, you can think about what you did, or you can maybe think about what you will do. But in a PvP, it's the situation is kind of frozen in time. You step away from your computer, but you're still in the world when you're doing the dishes or, when you're doing your chores. And that was a really pleasant experience, I found. Last thing I want to mention is I'm so enamored by Play by Post that I put up a campaign, a Play by Post campaign of Night Witches on the calendar. And I think that Night Witches is a perfect fit because it also has the rhythm that we were talking about of, the day phase and the night phase. So having a clear structure for PvP is a good thing. Then it has a clear ending point. It has the duty station where you say, okay, we finished the duty station, the game is done, or maybe Will, who's also in the game, you will be the GM for the next duty station. That's built in. The GMs can, or the MC can rotate. I also want to mention that I may have invented a new concept in role-playing games that I would like to be quoted from now on, which is inverse blue booking. So blue booking, a term that I heard from Donna, our birthday boy Donna, who's celebrating his birthday the whole month of February, I heard, told me about blue booking, which is you have a live game, and then you have kind of journaling in between live games, live sessions. And I invented inverse blue booking, which is play by post, and then finish it off with a live session to talk about the game, we have the live session on the calendar where we make characters for night witches. We will play the first duty station, then have a live session where we can either finish the thing or talk about our experiences, and then maybe have another round of play by post. You're welcome.
Well, I look forward to playing horse booking. Sure.
Thanks.
I just want to add to the PvP and the narration and everything. I mean, it really worked well, I think, because, I often find this on the Open Hearth, right? But the players that we had were all very generous in allowing you to narrate their characters. It felt like everyone had a grasp on like what the other characters were like. No one had any complaints. And I know when we were playing our campaign, you were very cautious about earnest but slightly patronizing approach to Ludmir, the Trail Knight, who's rolled terribly on his stats, basically, whereas I rolled like incredibly well on my stats. So it was always like, what ho, young squire, like Dominic was into that, so like he was doing the joke as well. Like, we were both in on the joke, and as we played the PvP, that came through more, whereas everybody else's narration of the Trail Knight was about how like we view him as one of the best of us, like he's out there. And then Dom's narration was all about like, Ludmir looks glumly at his cups and hopes that this whole travesty is over. It didn't help that he got put in a hospital like in his first fight, I think.
It was.
When we were narrating the fights and everything, we roll these dice, and it would be like, you got knocked off your horse, but then you impaired this guy's blow. And in honesty, I think it worked almost better than it would have done live because of that.
Definitely.
Generosity to be like, one of us would write a little note to say like, I think that, what I'm going to do here is probably roll in the dirt and pick up my sword, but you get to narrate everything up to that point because I know that you knock me off my horse kind of thing, and I knock you off your horse. You feel free to take it. And it was a very like give take approach. And, we'd always make attempts to fill in what the others were doing from the crowd, the NPCs. And again, it's part of that play culture where we're allowed to take control of the NPCs, of the environment in our narrations, rather than it being like no, I am the GM, I get to say what the guy in the crowd did.
I think the final was between Will's character and Gabe's character, and there was nothing for me to do. In fact, I asked a stupid question. Aren't you, I don't know, at guard 0 or something? And there was a, no, dude, I have 3 armor. So he had to correct me about the rules.
But just to go back to PvP, I've had one of the best PvP things I've ever done was a microscope game using Miro and a Discord to talk it through. And I think that microscope works quite well because the gimmick of microscope, not the gimmick, but the rules of microscope say to make your decisions and don't invite player input from other people. Don't discuss things. You made the decision. You made the event, the period, the scene, whatever, right? And then you can talk about it. Obviously everyone does talk about it because what kind of game would it be if you didn't talk about it?
So, Will, tell us about your recent gaming and then what you want to talk about.
Well, 2024 was a pretty quiet year. I think I mentioned that on the Game of the Year recap. The biggest game I've played is the one that Horst just talked about. But, 2025 is shaping up to be a bigger year for gaming already. I've got, another series of the cluster that Horst talked about. And, I'm not going to recap much about the cluster, but I will say that the very last session I played with Alan back in December, we had probably one of the best space fights I've ever had in any game. Like, it really worked out. There was a bit of, like I didn't want to be on the guns all the time. I wanted to be doing, like there's that tension in any game where you're taking on the role of a station. You end up locked into that station kind of thing. And as the freewheeling engineer, right, I got to run across the entire ship doing different whatever needed to be done, basically. I don't think you can get around that sometimes in these games, but it really felt like, like the combat in the Expanse TV show. Other games I've actually played recently, I finished off Christmas with a quick game of And to All a Good Night by Alex Roberts, which is a very quick hack that she made of her own For the Queen game. It's a Descended from the Queen game where it is Christmas night and you are all people who live in Father Christmas's Lapland. You are elves, you are reindeer, or you are Mrs. Clauses, and there can be multiple Mrs. Clauses. So what does that mean for there to be, multiple Mrs. Clauses in this Santa world that you're creating? You can tell that it's like, not a polished product. She's got it on her itch for a couple of bucks, but it was really fun. Like people who I played with were not big story gamers, but I find the For the Queen format really helps. Having it Santa was easier for them than the For the Queen has been in the past. I've had to do a lot of the heavy lifting in the For the Queen ones for people who are a little less into their abstract world building of like fantasy stuff. Whereas with Santa, people leaned into the Futurama, into the capitalism, into the elf union, that kind of thing. But they've brought out these really like good characters, but I recommend it to anyone. I mean, I will make that part of my Christmas gaming every year, I think. But other than that, I've started playing Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 1E, which is played for a group of friends in real life, and I'm enjoying playing with a group of new people. I guess is the biggest thing I can say for it. I immediately dislike the system. When we rolled characters, I was like, oh, great, I've got 15 in this and 16 in that and 8 in that. Oh, what can I be? Oh, I can be like 3 things. I just don't understand how this system continues as a thing that people play when, like, if you want to be a barbarian, you've got to roll like really high. All the other players came into this with these big backstories developed, and then they rolled the characters and were like, oh, I can't be any of those things. Whereas, I'm a bit less attached to my characters at the start of things. So I was like, yeah, whatever, I'm a druid. Cool, let's go. I feel like it has no motivations to be anything other than murder hobo, which is maybe not my scene. But I've got lots of games coming up. I'm going to run mine and Rich Rogers' hack of Hook Cartel. I'm going to run that at a convention here in Sheffield.
Oh.
I'm really looking forward to that. I'm going to do Bounty of the Week, a hack that you mentioned briefly again with Rich, with my local gaming group. And then other games I've got here on the Hearth are Cluster again. Got a good run of Mothership coming up, a 2-parter. I love Mothership. I mean, I love anything where you die horribly, particularly if it's in space. I'm managing to get into a few of Blake's Vaesen sessions, which I'm really looking forward to. Not played with Blake in a while. I hear good things about Vaesen. I've got a night which is PvP that someone mentioned, and a couple of things that I really wanted to play. Based off the end of the year podcast, such as A Family of Blades, which sounds really good. I managed to get into that, and somebody, I won't mention who, put up 2 of the Ben Robbins games that I haven't played, Follow and In This World, and I was very happy to wait the 48 hours before I could sign up for it, and then immediately get on that because
Nice.
I have those games, and my mission is to tick off every game that I own, at least physically. I must play. So that's going to scratch an itch that's been there for a while. But the game that I want to talk about is the game I'm most looking forward to running in 2025, which is a game I haven't run yet, but I've been reading avidly the beta that's just come out. It's Red Market 2nd edition, and it occurs to me that the last time I was on a podcast, it was to talk about Red Markets. And luckily, 2 of my players from that Red Markets campaign are here with me. So Caleb Stokes of Heaven on Games has finally released. I mean, they've been working him hard over at Arc Dream, doing all the Delta Green stuff, some of which I think is the best Delta Green content that's come out in the entirety of the game. I think Stokes Delta Green stuff lives in the here and now, whereas a lot of the published Delta Green content kind of still lives in the 90s or even earlier, and has a much more focus towards the military industrial sort of like high level, like what Majestic 12 was doing, or all of those like convoluted conspiracy stuff, whereas Stokes' stuff tends to be more along the lines of there is some mad cultist out in the world, and it's it uses themes of modern day America and things like that. It's much more like what I think Delta Green is meant to be, and it ties in with his game Red Markets, which is about the horrors of the real world in a zombie apocalypse, basically. So he's released 2E. 1E was one of my favorite games ever. A lot of people bounced off it. It is a very complex game. I'll just give the brief pitch to Red Markets. It's the end of the world. The zombie apocalypse happened, but the rent is still due. It's a game of economic horror. The entire purpose of the game is that you are takers who are adventurers, and you make your living in the carrion economy. You are the people who weren't lucky enough to make it on the other side of the wall. When the US government pulled back and basically wrote off everything west of the Mississippi, you're the people who got stuck out there. And as far as the government's concerned, you're dead. Obviously, you've still got to make a living. And, you're not like in full-on feudal kind of like scrapping around, because there is a world out there. There is an economy. There are goods and services. You live in the red markets. You live in the gray area. You live in that trade that everybody in the whole civilized part of the world is one day thinking that it's going to come back and get there. So there is money to be made where you are. You're just the poverty-stricken people who have to be at the hard edge of that. He's got a quote that I pulled from the new version. It is fun to play an adventurer. It is not fun to be an adventurer.
Yeah.
And I think that is Red Market. It is about the fun of playing, the not fun of being an adventurer. It is that grind, that danger, that threat. And it has a lot of systems that make you feel that threat in a way that is more than just saying that my character feels these things. You have economic pressures on you. So, the changes in 2E, they're not huge. I think it's still the same core game. I think there's been a lot of good work in tidying up the wording. It's a little more intuitive. I love everything that Caleb Stokes puts out, but I will say that when he writes a game, sometimes it is obtuse to read, I would say. And
agreed.
yeah, the actual mechanics are often quite intuitive when you boil them down and you manage to separate them out of that. He wrote a game called Phase Anatomy, and I can't work it out at all.
No.
But,
I remember the character keeper that Will made for Red Markets 1E, and it was like a conspiracy, like board of a mad person. Very obtuse.
Well, maybe, perhaps.
It did, though, help me distill, having read the rules, that character keeper. Once I looked at it, I could finally see how some of the mechanisms interlocked.
It is a game of interlocking mechanisms. I feel that the complexity of it is because it's an economic game. Like most games, if you don't track a resource or you don't do a thing, it doesn't matter that much. You know what I mean? You don't mark corruption in Urban Shadows, you'll mark it again. There's not much, granularity to it, but the whole point of red markets is that economy, right? You need to burn the charges on your gear because then you need to pay to restore the charges on your gear. You need to pay the debts to your references. You need to pay the debts for your family. It's all about making that money and where it all goes. And I think it actually abstracts a lot more than people perceive at the start. Like, when you spend charges, you're not counting individual bullets, you're just counting the economic cost of those bullets. Zombies are not fight one, it is fight a mob of zombies. It is it does work, but I think it takes a little shift in the way you look at it. Because if you look at it like an AD&D, for example, right, you'd be like, and I can tell you right now, it's way simpler than AD&D in terms of any resolution and mechanics. Way better. Some of the things that were tricky and were obtuse, he's made a lot more understandable. Negotiation. I love negotiation. That's one of my favorite parts of the Red Markets game, that how much money we're going to get paid for this job. It's a simplified one this time. Rather than that push-pull of like counters across the table, now it is the takers get a big pool of black dice, depending on their actions, and the negotiator, the client, has a series of chips that they can take away from the bounty that you roll, basically. So, you roll 8d10, you get like 56. If they've got 3 red chips, then they can take 15 away from you. And then, that's how much you're going to get paid for the job. And the whole contest is about resisting that or adding to how much money you can get. I think it'll work much better. The game's also like got more mechanics for driving some of the relationships that I think are there if you leaned into them, but don't really have a mechanical aspect to it in the original game, which was a bit of a failing given how much more of the rest of the game is mechanically driven. So like dependents now have like higher costs, but like those are associated with how well you support them, and they're better at clearing out your mental damage, basically. And I think that's going to drive some really interesting. I could only afford to give you 1 bounty this week, so I can't get you the TV that you wanted, but here's half a can of beans. I hope you're doing well. So I'm really looking forward to that. The Enclave generation now has it's a very minor tweak, but we generated our camp Lazarus last time. The holiday camp turned Enclave, run by counselors with a ruling party of the Sisters of Lazarus, who are nuns who were supposedly all immune. So we built a really good one because we're all nerds who do story games. But the new system has embeds that you will have relationships. You will have plus relationships and minus relationships with a person in your enclave of significance. Everyone will have a different one. So that will be then come into play when you're doing negotiations and like payments. And there is a system for internal enclave rep. So like for getting heat, if you are the murder hobos who continuously undercut your competition by sabotaging their vehicles, by poisoning the water supply, by getting in fights, or whatever, eventually your enclave will start going like, you guys are a menace, they're a nightmare, which I think is good. Like it can be quite punishing, and a lot more of the game seems to be built on building up that reputation as a good group of people to work with and for. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I can't wait to do more. I'm going to have to redo the entire character keeper. I'm going to have to get people who are used to bookkeeping. I'm going to have to get a group of players who embrace bleakness Yep, I'm not sure. I'll have to look hard to find them.
Right.
One big change, the combat seems much quicker. One big change is that you re-roll initiative. Like basically, like whenever you go up against an enemy, you roll to see who goes first every round. I think that goes against what I normally like in RPGs, but I think it could work really well here. But I'm looking forward to getting back into it. I went back over my notes for the old Red Markets game, went back over our sessions, and I'm definitely going to set it somewhere near Camp Lazarus in the aftermath of the Crusade. I'm going to test out vehicles, scores, where you just go and raid stuff from the loss, and maybe like try and get some like really mean like NPC antagonists there, so that you can face something like really serious. Because our last game, I think we had a few like sessions where player to players weren't consistent, or like weren't around. It broke up my original part of it, and I look back at my notes and I've got so many notes. I'm like, oh, I didn't use any of those. So yeah, that's Red Markets. I'm looking. I can't wait, and it's in the beta playtest, so I'm hoping that everyone wants to get involved in it and make it a better game.
It is a game that I think sings when you have buy-in, but there are so many groups I know who I would not run it for.
It's not a power fantasy by any means. I mean, if you are doing the power fantasy of Red Markets, you're so in depth by the time you paid all of it off that you've got to go really high, and you're one bad roll away from like getting bitten by a zombie and just getting infected. Like dear old Backslash got hit by some vector blood, I think, at the very last session, and then rolled a critical success and became immune. So it's a game of ups and downs. It's as he says in the book, what would a market be without volatility? Red Markets is a volatile game, I think.
How's the escape from the zone? Is that similar to 1E?
Oh, the retirement. The retirement is actually is really developed. That the retirement now has like the cost of it depends upon what types of things you're buying. So there's a basic one of just like I get out of the loss. Then there's how many people are you bringing with you? Are you setting yourself up to live really well there? I think that's a really good one because it was a bit. Everybody's is 50 bounty, no matter if it's starting an enclave or just getting one person over the border. This is, I haven't quite grokked that part yet because it's one of the more obtusely written sections in terms of calculating it. But the basics of it look really promising. You want to set up your own enclave, you will roll that retirement thing and it will tell you how well you set up that enclave, like which bits of your dream you had to compromise on because you didn't invest enough.
Oof. So I'm going to go next. And I talked in the last episode about all the stuff I've done recently. Right now, I'm in the middle of Sunken Hearts, Mutants and Masterminds, 3rd edition, and Star Trek Adventures, 2nd edition, which we just started. And I have coming up, I've got a 2-month thing of Blades in the Dark, Sword Opera, which is currently on Kickstarter, which is done by Eric and Eli, who helped me out with Hearts of Wulin. I'm excited about that. I'm also going to try out the Discworld Quick Start. I'm very uncertain about that, but I have some friends that want to try it, so we're going to do that.
I have played it.
And I saw your notes on it, yes, so it makes me a little skeptical. We'll see. It doesn't feel like there's much there. And then I'm doing, as Will mentioned, I'm doing 2 shots of Follow and In This World, or 2 1 sessions of those, because I want to try and get more Ben Robbins games on the calendar and get them all tried out. And which is actually what I'm talking about today. In December, I ran Kingdom, the 2nd edition, which is a GM-less game. It's about communities and the challenges facing it. And I had written back when Kingdom 1st edition came out, a number of framework. And so when I went to run these 2 Kingdom 2 shots, I did the one that's about there's a fantasy city, the warlock held it, the empires have come in and have taken care of the warlock, and now it's the aftermath of that, and what do? That's based on a pitch from Gareth Ryder Hanrahan called Heroes of the City that was in the Drama System book. And then the other one I did was my DS9 homage, which is Far Station Eschaton, which is kind of DS9, Babylon 5. I did 2 sessions of each of those. I really like Kingdom. I'm going to just not bury the lead here. It's one of my favorite GM-less story games, in part because it has a very tight structure. I like those kinds of open games when they tell me when I can go and they tell me when we should do things and have a process to work through. I've played a number of GM-less story games that I'm flailing. I don't know, am I supposed to be the GM now? Am I not supposed to be the GM? Like, what are we supposed to be doing here? But the basic premise of Kingdom is you have a major and a minor character in a kingdom, and any kingdom is a community, and that can be as small as a hospital or as big as a fantasy empire. One of the key ideas with it is that everybody wants the kingdom to survive. They may disagree, conflict on what the kingdom needs to end up looking like, but they all agree that the kingdom has to perpetuate itself. You set up some basics, sometimes pick some prompts. You establish a number of threats. You establish a couple locations per player, and you establish 2 to 3 kinds of characters that might exist in this world. And then you define a main character. You choose a role, describe who they are, and then from that locations list, you pick a couple of locations that they usually haunt. Then everybody gets one relationship established to the character they left. The roles there are the real meat of the game. This is the mechanical bit. Each main character at any time has one of 3 roles. They are the perspective, which means that you get to see what our choices are going to do and make predictions about the future and like literally mechanically put those on the page. You have the power, so you represent the authority in the setting, and eventually at the end, you're going to make the choice. And then you have the touchstone, and your character, however they feel, is how the majority of the population feels. So you get to show us that. You also make a minor character up, which I think is good to have. They don't have any kind of role, but they're there. And that felt nice because it is going around and calling scenes. And so you get some variety to what you get to play. So we've set a player who's the first player, and they create a crossroad. And that's a problem that's usually based on the threats that we've established, that it establishes an incredibly binary choice facing the kingdom. There's a yes or a no on this. In the fantasy game, the first one we did was, do we execute the Archmage's Vizier Ashar, who supplied information vital to bringing down her former master? And then the second one was, open up the secret libraries of the Archmage, yes or no? And again, in our play, we may change the complexion of what yes and what no look like, but in the end, we're choosing yes or no. One of the things I think is really important is to get a good crossroad, a crossroad that has some range, that it's not obvious the yes or no answer, and that you can kind of reshape. So once we got that crossroad in play, the lead player calls a scene. They say which other players they want to have in that scene and where that takes place. And usually you just play out a short scene about them reflecting on the crossroad that they're facing or the questions that are there. When that scene is done, the lead player chooses either to mark crossroads, which is a number of boxes equal to the players plus 1, or more rarely, they can also mark crisis, which is also, let's say a 4-player game is also 5 boxes. They mark crisis if what has happened in the scene really looks like it's going to cause much more problems for how people feel about the reaction, things like that. It's rarer to do that, but the crisis track goes across multiple sessions, whereas the crossroad pack, when it gets filled up, we resolve the crossroads.
How's that decided, though, what a crisis is?
So that is the player who's the lead player to say, okay, I think what happened isn't pushing us forward. Like, I don't think we're getting to the decision point, but I think, in fact, actually, this is what's happened is causing more problems. People have died or more arguments have been created, something like that. So that player will choose that. And then there's another place in the resolution where that can also get modified. In that scene, when a main character is in a scene, they can use their character's role powers, sort of the in-play powers. So the power character can use their authority, can establish laws, can have people arrested. They get to kind of narrate what the people in charge do. The touchstone, they just say how they're feeling, and that establishes how people feel. And then that colors later discussions. And then the perspective, they make a statement. And they say, this is going to happen if we choose yes. This is going to happen if we choose no. And they can put multiples of those on. They can put them in the yes column and then the no column. They can put contradictory ones on there. And they do mark it with their name because they kind of own that prediction. There are rules here. If you want to counteract another player's role move, if you want to change your role, and you can even overthrow another player and take their role from them. Now, I'm going to put that in brackets because I'm going to come back to that. So we play along, and usually you're going to end up with 5 or 6 scenes with a 4-player game because people are marking the crossroads, and eventually after that many scenes, we're probably going to go to that. We resolve the crossroads. The first thing that does is the power chooses yes or no. Do we do this or do we do this? They have to kind of make that decision and say what that looks like. And then whatever column has been chosen, the prospective player says, this came true, this didn't come true, this came true, this didn't come true. They get to say which of their predictions were correct. And then finally, the touchstone shows how the people feel about that. Do they react positively to that? Do they react negatively? And mechanically, once they've made that declaration, they can then add or subtract up to 2 boxes from the crisis track. Did this reduce the tension in the kingdom or did it increase it? There are some rules for what you do when 2 people have the same role. We played 3-hour sessions. We did session 0, which had, the setup, and then we did a crossroads. And then the second session each time we got through 1 crossroads. We hit about the midway mark, and I could see that we still had a couple more scenes. So I said, we're only going to get 1 crossroad. So let's let these later scenes breathe. But I think reasonably in a 3-hour game, you're probably just going to get 1 crossroad, which is interesting. It means that if you want everybody to have a chance to call a crossroad or get to a crisis, you do have to have a number of sessions there. This is a game I played a lot of Kingdom First Edition, and I really enjoyed it, but it had a bunch of little fiddly bits in it. Every time I tried to teach it, it would create these speed bumps. The second edition is very much the same. If you play Kingdom 1E, you're going to know Kingdom 2E, but he has sanded off all those rough points. It's definitely a Ben Robbins game. It's that same kind of scope and approach, but it's very different from any of the other ones. I think that this game, Microscope and Follow, could all really easily slot into an existing campaign as a means of zooming in and looking at a particular thing. As if you've hinted at something happening somewhere else, you could use this to resolve it, or even as a break in between campaign arcs.
When you said you were going to talk about this, I looked at it and was like, oh, I could use Kingdom for red markets, like Enclave generation. And I was looking at it more and I was like, no, because it's telling the story of the Enclave,
Yeah.
which is the story of the red markets game, really. But, it would be really good to be like, well, what are the other Enclaves up to, And like we could return to the one from the first game and do Camp Lazarus and be like, what has life been like in Camp Lazarus since the last campaign of Red Markets?
Yeah, I think that would be great. I can imagine, like my first thought was like if you did Ars Magica and you wanted to know what your neighboring covenant was happening there, there are a lot of good uses for it. It's not a one and done session story game. It is a story game that I think really you will need a couple of sessions to get through to build up the fabric of it. So Kingdom does have a problem though. And this is what we call the first play problem. So I teach board games. I play a lot of board games, things like that. And there are a class of board games. And my best example of this is the Alhambra dice game. There is a thing when you play, you need to do this if you want to win. You have to pick up these tokens if you want to win. If you do not pick up these tokens, you are not going to win. And I tell people that every time, and they ignore it. And then they lose, and they're like, oh, what happened here? The second time they play it, they do not ignore those. It is a game that the first time you play it, you are not going to get some of the things. For example, again, both of these two session series that I ran, this was most people's first play with it. And so the mechanics for conflicts, the mechanics for role seizure, for overthrow, all of those things, we did not get any of those. Nobody pushed on those. Nobody got them. And in both cases, the wishes were, oh, I wish we'd seen that. Well, we didn't see it because people were still getting used to the role powers. They were still trying to figure out how to use them. If we had played a couple more sessions, we would have seen it. But you might be disappointed that some of the mechanics you're not going to hit because they do take a while to get under your belt.
Would it be a possibility to do some kind of dry run where you pick a mechanic and play for 5 minutes and they have to do the move and play the chips or whatever, and then start the real thing?
Oh, that's a really interesting idea.
Put them in the situation where they would have to do the thing for a couple of minutes before you start the actual game. Could help.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good idea. It hadn't even occurred to me to do something like that. Because of course my brain is always go as fast as we can. We want to get to the meat of the
Mm.
stuff. So yeah, no, actually that's a really good idea. I will try that the next time I run Kingdom.
Call
Um,
it the horse principle.
the horse principle, the horse inverse blue booking non-principle.
Yes,
So
the year of Horst.
yes.
It's upon us.
Yeah. All right. So listeners, we are going to move to our second segment. So, listeners, for our second segment, we ask everyone to talk about something that they're really digging right now and why. So, Horst, what is giving you life?
Well, I am completely enamored by the January Grand Sumo Tournament in Tokyo, the Hatsubasho. And why? Because it is amazing. I mean, it is a sport. I think it is a very aesthetically pleasing sport. It's almost like opera. It's so opulent. It's insane. Well, there's the sport part, there's athleticism under the fat, there's a lot of muscles. There's the technical side that I absolutely adore. The tournament is still ongoing. Tomorrow is the last day. My boy Hoshoryu has a chance to win. But a couple of days ago, there was an underarm forward body drop. That is something that you would see in a WWE event, with the exception that in wrestling in the United States, both guys worked together to pull this off. And Ura, who pulled it off, had to fight a guy. I don't know. It's just beautiful. The ropes of the Giori, which is the referee, they're colorful. They have these crazy patterns. They hold a lacquered war fan that reflects the colors and the kind of shapes of the ropes. There's the Jubidari, which is the announcer who will sing the name of the wrestlers in this theatrically drawn out way. And then there's another kind of layer to it, which is the Shinto religion. It's half sport, 30% ritual, and I would say 20% art form in the Gesamtkunstwerk, as we say in Germany, like a combination of art forms, fashion, the ginkgo leaf haircut. It's beautiful, but the Shinto part is, they're throwing salt
Mm-hmm.
to purify the ring. Before I waffle on forever, I'm just talking about the Yokozuna ring entering ceremony. So the Yokozuna is the highest rank. This year, the Yokozuna retired during the tournament. It's the first time we have no Yokozuna since 1993, which is a big deal. And when he enters the ring, the gods watch. The gods are there because the whole basho is to celebrate them. He's accompanied by the herald, also called as the dew sweeper, and who checks if the road is clear. He has the sword bearer at his side. Then he wearing this blindingly white robe that is made in a Shinto temple where they twist the ropes, like a dozen of sumo wrestlers twist the rope and twist the rope. If they twist any more, it will create a black hole. And then two of these ropes are braided into each other. And that is what he's wearing with these lightning-shaped dengni bits. And then we'll enter the ring. He will stamp on the clay in order to drive away demons. So you have gods, you have demons. Under the doyo are offerings of dried nuts, sake, and a squid, which will be dug out at the end of the tournament. So it is amazing. If you like sport and if you like opera, you have to watch a sumo tournament. There are 6 tournaments in the year, always 2 weeks, and it's the best 2 weeks every other month for me.
Awesome. Wow. Will, what is giving you life?
Horse's description of sumo wrestling, to
Yes,
be honest.
seriously.
That sounds great. Sounds I had no interest in sumo wrestling whatsoever. I had no idea it was such a ritual. But what's giving me life is a bit more prosaic and bourgeoisie. I went on my first ever skiing holiday last week. Turns out I really, really enjoy skiing. I've only done it on an indoor slope before. We have has snow, but it's, an artificial slope, right? And I thought that was great compared to the full artificial slope that I tried when I was a kid, which is like nylon ropes woven together. and that's god awful because like you fall over on that, you get carpet burn, it hurts so much, it's not good. Whereas like did it on the real snow, and I was like, oh, this is great, indoor slope. But turns out it's a lot better when the slope doesn't end after like 100 meters or whatever, right? When it lasts more than 10 seconds, if you build up any speed. You wake up and you're in this beautiful place with like crisp air. And, I was up in like the Alps and I was with all these people who are really good skiers who had been doing it since they were kids. And so, like it was all old hat to them. But to me, it was like, I have never been anywhere like this before in my life. Like look around, you just see these great mountains. You can see like how people thought of them as like dragon's bones or like the faces of trolls or their teeth or whatever, right? Then you get up on the ski lifts and it looks even better. And it's all like so eerie and silent up there. And there's the initial sort of intimidation of it all. Like you are up a mountain, you are going down it on two sticks that you don't really know how to control, like in the real world. But you get better at it. It's a lot more effort than I realized it would be. It takes a lot of effort to slow yourself down in those slopes. I think paradoxically, it's less effort the better you are at it. But by the end of a week, I felt really in the zone about it. It was just great. Like it's a ridiculously like complex niche for, I'm not gonna lie, for rich people. Let's be perfectly honest. Like a lot of the people there were rich compared to how I used to be. I'm pretty well off compared to how I was when I was younger. And when I was a kid, it was other people's families went skiing. It certainly wasn't a thing that my parents could afford. No one in my entire family could afford. No one in my street could ever have thought about it. It was like completely inaccessible. Turns out it's great. I can see why the Scandinavians do so much of it. Pro tip to people: be born in a country where you can drive to skiing easily. Don't be born in England where you have to wait for 1 week of good snow to maybe ski in Scotland or spend thousands of pounds to go to other places. But yeah, skiing, turns out it's up to the hype. I really want to go again. I'm going to go back to the indoor slope this week, and I'm probably going to be bored silly in about half an hour. But yeah,
been spoiled.
Yeah, completely been spoiled. I mean, it's taken me like 5 days to not be massively disappointed every time I look out the window and don't see a mountain range, just see Manchester.
Awesome. Mine is significantly more prosaic. One of the things I really like are long form analyses of video games that I'm not going to play. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I will hear something. That's how I got to playing Control. Was I watched a retrospective on all of Remedy's games, and that made me go and do that. But one of the channels I like is called Grimbeard, and he does old video games and computer games, both old action click and point, but things like American Mickey's Alice and stuff in the PS2 era. And he's really funny, like, and in a really dry, deprecating way. He's got an amazing bit that he does, and he's great to listen to. His comments are super funny and engaging, and actually it's one of the things where Sherry really enjoys watching those with me as well. It's not a genre she would normally like, but we sit there and we watch them whenever they come out. And I don't know how to describe it, but amongst the sort of video game summary review channels that I watch, I think his is one of the strongest, and I highly recommend that. He has a Patreon. I back him on Patreon because he's strong enough for that. But I think his stuff is just YouTube.
You don't like, I might be wrong here, but you don't like playing horror games particularly, do you? Like Alien Isolation or stuff like that?
No. Here's the thing: is I have no reflexes. If it is turn-based, I can do it. But like anything that requires any kind of coordinated skill, it's why with Control I have one hit kill turned on at all times, because otherwise I couldn't play it.
A game where you play a god, basically.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I am very much for that. I want to see the story, and Control pays off for that in spades.
I mostly just play the games. I never watch like the YouTube or whatever, right? But I don't have that like barrier to like playing the reflex ones, or like it's too scary for me to be the person. That's why I play those games. But like, it's great that there are these channels to be like, because Alien Isolation is by far like the best Alien movie that was released.
Oh yeah, I did watch a full A to Z playthrough of Alien Isolation, which it was great.
When the player is very squirmy, that is awesome to watch. Like when they when they scream and something's happening.
So we've come to the end of our episode. I do need to ask, Horst, if people want to follow you or check out your stuff or whatnot, where can you be found?
I can be found on the Discord. I have no other really like social media presence. But if you want to read our amazing Playboy post, there's a transcript on my blog. It's called Black City Gauntlet on Blogger.
Okay. We'll have the link for that in the show notes. And Will, anything you want to mention?
If you can find me in places, I'd be very worried, but the only place you can find me that I'm not worried about is the Open Hearth Discord, where I probably post way too often because for my job, I'm at a computer all day. So Discord is always there.
Listeners, that's our show, the Open Hearth Podcast. By the way, I'm going to say it hearth or hearth different every single time. The Open Hearth Podcast is a production of Open Hearth Gaming Community. We have an online gaming calendar where folks can sign up for our sessions. If you've enjoyed this show, consider supporting our Patreon at patreon.com/openhearthgaming.com. We have a Discord, as you may have heard. Anyone's welcome to join that. We are on Blue Sky, Tumblr, which is the best one, and we're also on Mastodon at Dice Camp. For obvious reasons, we are not on Twitter or X or whatever the F that's called right now. Anyway, if you're curious about that, you can find out more about all of that at openhearthgaming.com. Hey, please consider rating, subscribing, and reviewing our show. It helps us out with whatever algorithm you are currently abasing yourself to. So there you go. Horst, Will, thank you for joining us today.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
That's our show.